Welcome again. Today we're going to spend some time talking to a person who has spent her entire career imparting knowledge to people. Listening to this podcast again myself, I selected a few points that you might want to be on the lookout for. First, how to be a confident speaker despite being shy. How to show enthusiasm even when talking about something you're not particularly passionate about. And we'll be discussing how much talking is too much talking. Of course, we'll finish with some introspection as usual and the ChatGPT generated question. So, enjoy. Hello everyone and welcome back to Publicly Speaking, the podcast making public speaking easy listening. Today with us we have Sheila. How do you do, Sheila?
Hello, everybody.
And
Hello,
my name
Tim.
is Tim. Hi. And this podcast is being brought to you by tailoredguidance.com. So we have Sheila Curtis today, and we're very happy. We thank you very much for having accepted the invitation to do this podcast. And just as an introduction, to tell everyone a little bit about you to start us off, we met at a job interview. You were interviewing me for a position, which, by the way, I got. And so we got to work together for a few years. I had the privilege of observing you being an excellent teacher and also a leader of people in your school back in those days. At the same time, you were also representing your fellow teachers as a trade union representative for the school, but also borough-wise. And you were a teacher governor. So you were making the most out of all the different privileges you had to help better the conditions of your fellow teachers, which a lot of people were very thankful for, as I remember. You then went on, of course, you left me behind. That's fine. I've got over time, I got over it. But you went on to work for the London Science Learning Centre as a CPD developer and facilitator, and for the UCL Institute of Education as essentially a teacher of teachers, a PGC tutor and chemistry subject lead. So thank you very much for agreeing to do this. It's a privilege. I'm really happy to have this conversation with you in the next few minutes. I'd like to start the podcast as we have so far, as it is the second episode. This is the second time I'll be asking this question. What is the earliest memory you have of doing a presentation, of putting yourself in front of somebody else and having to say what you've got to say?
Yeah, I think it was in sixth form at school. So thanks for the introduction, first of all. So my sixth form at school, I went to a very, I suppose, what you call a traditional grammar school for girls. We didn't have anything much in terms of interactive education. I would say it was pretty much the teacher came in, started talking, and you wrote down notes, and then at the end of the year you learnt it. And then the sixth form, we had a biology teacher who was a little bit more open-minded. So she said, right, each of you's got an aspect of the course that you have to develop, a presentation for the rest of the class. So in other words, we were asked to do a bit of teaching. So this is a long time ago, and I just remember being so scared. I was so scared I couldn't really get out of the toilet, to be honest. I was in like I couldn't really put it together. In the end, I think we did it in pairs, and I probably did stand up and do a bit of it, but I know I was a wreck. I was shaking. That's my earliest memory.
Okay. Do you remember if you had notes or if you managed to learn it by heart or?
Yeah, we would have had notes. We would have had notes. And obviously I'm talking back in the 70s, so there was nothing sort of like this, no electronic aids to help us whatsoever. We may have had the foresight to think of using little cards.
Yes.
But I don't remember that we did. I remember that the girl that I did it with, who I'm still in touch with, interestingly, she was a lot more confident than me, maybe a bit more, out there. And between us, we managed to do it. I don't remember even what the topic was, but I do remember the fear. That's,
so it's interesting because I remember working with you. There were one teacher in particular that I remember being extremely shy, and you telling me now that as a younger person you were also quite shy. So how does one how is one thinking, well, I'm really, really shy. Let's make it a job for myself to be talking in front of other people, especially very intimidating London teenagers at the time. Why would you become a teacher when you're not that shy and reserved?
How did I become a teacher when I was that shy and
Yeah,
reserved?
why would you decide to do that to
Well,
yourself?
that is, I do know exactly why I became a science teacher. So
Okay.
when I came out of university, it was 1981, and the unemployment in this country was huge, and I didn't have the top degree, so I wasn't going to go on to do research. And I got a job. The only job I could get was working in an engineering company doing computing. And as part of, I really didn't enjoy that. Working in a corporate environment, it was not for me. And as part of that, I was actually training some of my managers to learn the computing program that I was doing. And whilst I didn't enjoy teaching them because they were actually very rude and quite unpleasant to a young woman, I I realised that actually I'd done all these years of science and that actually was quite a good communicator when I needed to be. And so I went and did a PGCE at that point because it was really a case of there wasn't much else. I did something like 90 applications, couldn't get a job in a science field as a
Okay.
scientist. And so I went back and did my PGCE at that stage. That's
So let
why
me ask you, yeah, sure. Let me ask you, you talked about being a good communicator. How did you realize at one point, because you said you're going from standing in front, struggling and shaking and being in front of your fellow students, and suddenly you're realizing that what happened in between?
Well, I suppose as a student, and coming from this all girls environment, which I think developed us as quite confident young women actually by the end of the school, and going into university and being part of this university environment, actually in a very, I would say, quite a small university, but with quite a predominantly right wing agenda in this place. There was a small group of us that was trying to stand up for certain things. So there was all sorts of things going on in the news at the time, and actually standing up and being part of that debating society, as it was called, the student union. I remember standing up and actually having to stand up in front of people. And when you felt really strongly about something, when you felt confident about your own views on something, when you felt that what you were saying was relevant and appropriate for other people to hear and was supporting of other people, the little part of it was kind of, there was quite a lot of anti from the majority of this place, so there was a bit of kind of bravado as I'm going to kind of fight back in a way. But that, I think, is where I started from, and that's why I say being part of a student union group at that point in time gave me the confidence for something I felt quite strongly about, to be able to stand there and say what I believed in. And I think for me, that's a really important point about being able to talk, is I don't think I can stand up and say somebody else's words if I'm forced to say something that I don't believe in. I'm not going to communicate it well.
So this is interesting because you make the jump to standing at university and saying and talking about what you believe in those debate societies, but the reality is you didn't have to put yourself in that situation. You could have been a student like any other who doesn't get involved with that side of things and just goes to lectures, does their homework, their exams, and that's it. So what I get from what you've just said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you would put emphasis on the feelings and how strongly you felt about what you had to say, and therefore then putting you in a position where you could say it. Have I got this right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I became part of a kind of, I suppose you're looking at the late 70s. There was quite a strong movement, feminist movement, if you like, and having that background coming from this all girls environment, grammar school, admittedly, so we were privileged, but I think that's where I became part of a women's group at university, and that was a common thing at the time. That for people to be thinking that way, that we were a small group of people And we weren't all women, by the way. I was kind of unusual in the sense that I thought actually this issue was about everybody, not just about me, but it was predominantly about women's rights, I suppose. And I suppose that's what got me thinking. And trying to think. There was the issue at the time was this. It's a kind of issue that's, maybe people don't know about, was this thing about toxic shock, that women were suffering from toxic shock and it's about things that they used for their monthly periods, and it caused people to actually become very ill and die. And it was an issue in the news at the time. And that's what I stood up and talked about, which, when you consider somebody was feeling shy, it's a very delicate conversation to have,
Definitely.
But it was
Absolutely, yeah.
really, it's really bizarre, isn't it, when you think about it? But I did feel very strongly about it. And I can't even remember the exact issue. There was something about there wasn't enough information about it, and people weren't being taken seriously about how they were. And that was it. It became an issue. I don't know. That's the one.
That's fine. Okay. So yeah, because I talk about that I'm currently recording an online course that I'm trying to, plugging it right now. But yeah, it's coming out. I'm working on it very slowly. But I think it's something that comes out quite a lot when I wrote the course about finding the confidence and being enthusiastic when you speak. And you talked about other people's words and your own words. I think in order to be a decent public speaker, I think anybody will recognize that you need to feel that what you're saying is true, and it's important, and the people you are talking to are going to somehow benefit from it. And if you're not able, if you're quite detached from the subject matter, you can be an actor about it. I'm sure there's a lot of very good actors and actresses out there who can deliver words that are not theirs in a very compelling way. But I feel like when it's not your job to be an actor, but it's your job to just deliver a message, I think it's very important to make the message yours. And if you have an opportunity to check for yourself that what you're going to say to these people, you've actually tested it for yourself and it actually works. And the more proof you have of the veracity of what you're saying, the more naturally enthusiastic you'll be about it. I think there are people that are extremely shy, reserved, introverted, and you put them on one specific subject, and suddenly they just burst out of their shell, and you can really see a different person.
Totally.
And so, I mean, it's not always easy, because I'll tell you what. So we'll get to science now. You're a science teacher. You've made that leap, and I would say there are parts of science that I find mind-numbingly boring. And there are some that I have no problem teaching because it's extremely interesting to me. What would you say to someone who is being told in a professional setting, you have to talk about this subject, and they're not particularly enthusiastic about it? How would you tell them to perhaps become enthusiastic about it? Or would you tell them to just act it out?
It's in terms of a science subject.
But I guess if that skill is transferable, that would be great. So, but if it's a science subject, what would you say?
I think if you're taking something like, so for me, and me, Tim, in terms of my perception of how science should be taught, science is part of the world that we live in. Okay, so there is not one single aspect of science that does not have some world importance, up to my mind. Unfortunately, sometimes the way it's presented is very academic and determined by previous generations that decided that when science was an elite subject. So if it's a very elite, what I'm saying is that I think with whatever you're talking about is part of a bigger, is probably part of a bigger picture. Don't know if you generalize that in all things. I mean, I'm not thinking broadly about that right now, but if you take something, if you're not interested in this thing per se, if it's just, I mean, I always think about things like, I wasn't very interested in teaching biology, but which is weird, but if you take something like atomic structure, for example, you take something like atomic structure and you say, like, this is just about atoms. Atoms have got this structure. Who cares? But actually, if you say this, I don't know, this mobile phone is made of atoms and they're all separated from each other, how come I can't put my hand through it? You know,
Yeah.
you find a reason to say there's something interesting about these things. They exist, these things is a bigger picture. There's always a more complex. Now, if you're trying to simplify something for an early stage person in their understanding of this, I'm trying not to just talk about science, but if you're trying to
Yeah.
simplify something, then it's difficult always to do that. So there may be that you need a different way of communicating that thing. I mean, I would say I'm not a stand up and give a lecture type of person. That's not my way ever. You know, I've done it once or twice in my life. I don't really like it very much because it's not really about me when I'm talking, it's about you. So it doesn't really matter whether I'm interested in it, it's whether you're interested in it that matters to me. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? So it's kind of
Yeah, sure.
finding. I'm thinking out loud. Sorry, but that
No, sure.
I'm thinking if I'm bored by something, are you bored by it? Because if you're not bored by it, then maybe, and I've got some information that can help you to understand something more about it, then all I've got to
Sure.
find out is what questions do you have?
Yeah. So, okay. So if I'm to underline what you said, which I found very interesting, this idea of being conscious of the bigger picture. I think that's
Yeah,
huge. I think
number one.
what you just said, yeah, I think being conscious of the bigger picture, whatever you have to talk about, there must be a reason why you're accepting to talk about this. Whether it's
Yeah,
because you, even if it's just so you can keep your job and continue feeding your family, I'm just putting it at the basics here,
of
but there
course.
must be a bigger picture to the whole thing. And I think you need to think about that bigger picture absolutely to be able to see more enthusiastic about speaking it. And okay, so you said something really interesting, and I agree with you. I have observed your lessons, and I've seen the kind of person you are in front of children, for example, when you were imparting knowledge to them. Quite an impressive teacher you were, and you were
Thank
able to let the children do sort of what they were going to do, and yet at the end of the lesson, you could all ask them if they'd learned something, and they all had, which is a wonderful thing. However, I'm going to say this. What do you think should be? Because I think there's always I feel that there should always be a point in the lesson where there must be a time where the children sit and listen, and just where you are imparting the basic knowledge,
you.
and then even if it's just to explain what they need to, the safety precautions that they need to take to do an experiment, right? So
Mhm.
how far should we take this? You know, what would you say? How do you know when to say, okay, I'm going to talk for 10 minutes and then we're going to have a 50 minutes hands-on, let's understand the issue here.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
I'm going to talk for half an hour and half an hour, or I'm going to talk for 20. How do you decide how you're going to do that?
Yeah, it probably depends on your audience, doesn't it?
Okay.
Uh, you know, it depends on how long. So, like adults can concentrate probably for 10 to 15 minutes,
Yeah.
maybe, really honestly, with,
Yeah.
without kind of thinking about something else. And that's
Yeah.
quite
Agreed.
hard
Yeah.
work. So if you've got a group of young people or a group of adults whose concentration span is small, then you've got to break that up. So you break that up. Nowadays, obviously, we break it up with visuals and
Mhm.
written things in front of them or electronic things if you're lucky enough to have access to computers. You say you yes, you have to impart information. I have information that a young person doesn't have. So I need them to understand they I need to attach that onto whatever knowledge they've already got. I need to work out how to do that, and I need to get that across to them, of course. Um, but whether it's, I don't think you can have a one size fits all. I think you have to judge who you've got in front of you, and I think that's, for me, looking at some of the later, education ideas that have been coming out and going around as a PGC tutor going around visiting all the schools in London and hearing how some of these policies are implemented. It's like this rule in this school, this rule in this school, and if it's a blanket rule, it won't work for all children. So
Mm.
I think that and the problem of training people to impart information to people, as in teachers probably,
Yeah.
is that you have to have flexibility.
Mm.
You have to be
Okay,
flexible.
so I absolutely agree with you, by the way. And by the way, just in brackets, you talk about PGC and I talk about PGC. Just for those who don't, I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah,
It's the training for teachers in the UK. So
yeah,
there are
I've got
different
it.
programs that you can do, but one of the programs is a year program where you go into university, you go into a school, and you're a teacher, but you get a tutor who regularly comes, checks your progress, allows you, observes you, and helps you to become a more confident teacher. Which this is where you were intervening. You were also sort of mediating, weren't you, between the school and this new trainee teacher who was your
Yeah,
responsibility, but
yeah,
under their
yeah,
supervision.
yeah,
So
yeah.
okay, so it's really good. So how would you assess that? Okay, you said you show flexibility, all right? So sometimes you got to say, okay, I'm going to talk for 10 minutes, I'm going to talk for 15 minutes. How do you assess it? How do you decide, okay, now I think it's time for me to stop talking and then start making it more interactive?
Well, I suppose you have to have different ideas in your head of what you're going to do. I mean,
Yes.
one of the wonderful people that I work with, who was actually one of the tutors at King's, would always call this, look at this as responsive teaching. That become,
Right.
rather than assessment, a responsive teacher, you become responsive to what's happening in front of you. So you walk in. I always remember one day going in and a child saying we were going to be talking about a very interesting aspect of of metals being more reactive than each other. And this child
Yeah.
had spent a year on a boat. So she said, well, what you do is you get a large lump of magnesium in a bag or whatever it was, and you slap it on the side of the boat, and your boat doesn't rust. And it's like, wow, this child, because of her own life experience, had this thing. So I
Yeah.
was like, well, why don't you come up here and tell everybody else about it, rather than me
Yeah.
trying to go back into my boring kind of way of doing it. So you have to. I mean, that's a very extreme example, and it doesn't happen all the time, obviously. But I think you have to respond to the people, what's happening in front of you. So you can have plan A, which is I'm going to tell them this for 10 minutes, but they come in, there's been a row in maths, and they're all got ants in their pants and they're jumping up and down and the behaviour's going off the wall. So you go, oh, hold on a minute, I think we need to do something different here, because I'm just going to be shouting at you because you don't want to listen
Yeah.
to me,
Yeah.
not because of me or not because of you, but just because of some other thing. So you have to
Or
respond to what's
yeah,
happening.
or they've just had
And,
PE and they come into your lesson, they're absolutely sweaty and just wanting to sleep.
and they put their, yeah,
And
all the heads go down. Yeah.
yeah, that's it. Yeah. So that's okay. So I really I had a thought in my mind, but what you're saying is so interesting. I keep losing it. So
Sorry.
that no, please don't apologize. So this is really good. So you're saying being able to be adaptable. I've just recorded one of my chapters in my lessons about outlines. Okay, so having an outline so that you can have. I explain in this lesson, although I don't want to say too much because I obviously want people to watch the lesson, but I explained that an outline should be there also as a memory aid, and
Yeah.
it should be there to help you remember what you want to put across. Okay, what you want people to get out of, without being a full manuscript, a full
Yeah.
transcript of what you say. Now, teachers are very good at blagging it. Let's face it. Okay, they are very good at turning up and saying, as you said, being very adaptable and say, right, they've just come in the lesson. What I've just planned isn't going to work. Let's review that a little bit. And teachers are very good at that. However, if you are somebody who needs an outline, who needs a plan, how do you think? And we did use at teachers, we are supposed to have lesson plans, especially when Ofsted, the teachers inspection, turns up. You're supposed to show them that you have lesson plans.
Yeah.
How
Maybe
do
not
you?
anymore, but
Yeah.
it goes and comes.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. But that's good to know. We'll talk about that. So how would you show flexibility in an outline, for example? because you can't be ready for any circumstances. You have to be able to write that up and say, this is, what would you say?
When we were writing lesson plans together as teachers in
Yeah,
the school, we used to have quite a lot of variety within the long-term plan. So things
yeah,
that you could pick and choose from. And the idea of that was to make it as easy as possible for the teacher to be flexible. I don't think that always worked, because I don't think other people pick up other people's plans very well.
yeah,
But there was ideas there for people to take from. I think that you need to have a kind of if this happens then this, if this happens then if then
yeah.
else, I suppose, kind of idea about. And that
Okay.
might be based on, again, I'm going back to Chris Harrison from King's, and she's very good at this, looking at pivot questions, looking at pivots. What's the pivot? What you know, I'm gonna ask this question, I'm gonna find out about this, and then the response will send me, okay, actually, probably half of the class need to go there and half of the class
Yeah,
need to go there. Now you've got an even bigger problem, because you know you can't
yeah.
be the person in the front. You've got to
Okay, yeah,
be.
that
It's
it's tough sometimes. I found that there was, because, okay, I'll tell you what, when you lecture a child, I don't mean in the sense that, telling them off. I mean, when you
no, no,
actually
no.
impart them, yeah, you're standing in front of them and you tell them what's what. I feel
Yeah,
that the pressure is on the teacher to be understood, to be to be clear in what they say, to be logical, to be
yeah,
entertaining in the way that they express is
yeah,
enthusiastic, so as to draw the attention of the pupil. And if the pupil don't understand, it's a teacher's fault, right?
yeah,
I feel though, when the roles are reversed and you work, okay, yeah, so when the roles are reversed, okay, and you give the task to the children, I feel that it puts a lot of pressure on the children, and somehow it also puts a lot of pressure on the
yeah.
teacher to make sure that everybody sort of understands what's going on. And I think instead of, I think it not only spreads the pressure, but it also increases the overall amount of pressure that exists within the classroom when you sort of work in a way where you say, okay, let's do this activity and let's figure out together what it is that we have to know. So
I
I'm not
think,
sure.
yeah, but I think what happens is that you need, even if you give somebody a 10-minute talk or lecture, we're going to call it that, then you can't take the responsibility on yourself for the person to have to know that thing that you've said. The only way that the person knows that, whether you're talking neuroscience earlier, you have to link that idea onto what you've already got in your head. Now, if that step is too big, as in you as a teacher have thought there's something already in there because I taught it last week, yeah, and it's not
Yeah.
there and there's nothing to link it to, that will not work. So what
Mm.
I think is often missing is that children are not given, possibly adults when they're learning as well, are not given the time to demonstrate what they know. So talk by all means for 10 minutes, and be interesting and engaging and show lots of visuals and videos and all those things, but then have some kind of individual activity or group activity that person or people or children can demonstrate what they've understood by that. And that's on the same
Okay.
thing. So it's that demonstration of understanding that allows you to step, and that is actually when you will begin to identify the alternate conceptions that people have, that we all have. Even at my great age, I keep finding things that I always thought was this, and there's something else.
Mm. Mm.
We don't know what those are until we actually try. And often that's where they say, when you teach something, you understand it the best. When you talk about something, you understand it because you look into the detail in a way that maybe you go, oh, really? Is that what I have always misunderstood? So
Mm.
it's that kind of I think it's got to be both. It's got to be both. Like I say, you and I as science teachers we have all of the information as best as we can for as many of the subjects as we can, and obviously the people that we're teaching, the children, have less, so we've got to work out some way of helping that to happen. And some of that might be engaging them in independent learning strategies, for example, which is what I think my biology teacher was trying to do to me in the sixth form, was to say, actually, you've had a lot of dictation all your school life. You've written everything down. Luckily, I was good at learning by rote, so I could regurgitate the stuff, but it doesn't work in terms of being an analytical person. So then what you need to do is you need to give the children the chance to show what they can do with something, so give them the information. It could be sometimes as a teacher I would give people a piece of writing, like out of a textbook. Hey, give them a newspaper article, give them both things, find the problems, give them. And I don't think it's the problem is that many people always think, oh, you're just going to send children away with no structure, and if that's disastrous. Children can't do it for themselves, and in a classroom situation they need structure. We're talking about teaching, not about presenting, but it's a different.
No, I get what you're saying, but yeah, you're right. Let's try and go on to the adult side of things, because I think this is going to help us to also summarize what we've just talked about in the classroom. Let's talk inset day for a second. Now, for people who non-teachers out there and people who are not in the UK, inset days were essentially training days for teachers. So we'd take a few days off from teaching children, a few days off a year, and we would get taught ourselves. Usually an external person would come over and tell us how to do our job, essentially, or the head teacher, or some, they had something to pass on to us. And I often found when we had an external person coming over, they would lecture us. They would, present their information for a few minutes or so, and then they would always end up with some sort of activities. And you know what? Children are adults, teachers are even worse than children when it comes to doing these activities. It was always an absolute nightmare. I really always felt bad for the trainer that would come over to our school, because like none of us wanted to do this. None of us wanted to do this thing. Just tell us what to do. Just lecture us for. Well, that's how I felt anyway. Just tell me what to do, all right, and I'll do it, okay. And I didn't want to do this. Let's do this group activity. I did this, and I always found it very frustrating. And I know it might be a personal thing, and I suppose other people might disagree. You might, but from what I could observe, I could see a lot of teachers. I mean, of course, there could be a little bit of shyness, a little bit of reservedness. But even when we all knew each other, we really struggled to get into the activity. So what I'm trying to get at is it really important for even adults to be able to do hands-on activities to get a point across?
Yes.
Do you think that was really useful?
Depends on the activity.
Right. I knew you were going to say that as well.
Well, I mean, Tim, I went into, after leaving the classroom,
Hold on, I've lost this
professional development.
Sorry, I'd lost your sound for 1 second. Can you repeat what you just said, please? Sorry.
Okay. When I left the classroom, I went to become a professional development leader I think I can't remember the exact job title. And that was involving working with groups of, sometimes whole departments. I could have been that person coming in to do the activities, generally on a specific theme that the departments had asked for, or people would come to me for a day or come to me for a series of days, which was a much better option. But obviously schools didn't necessarily afford that, because they have to pay for supply teachers. And I think that, again, I think what a lot of the activities are trying to do, if I'm going to be fair to them, is they are trying to get people to think about their own practice, to be reflective about what you're doing and what you want to change and how you want to move forward. And what happens at the first day of term, if that comes into you and somebody asks you to say what you think, you're just like, I really got too much work to be thinking about this. I need to go get on. I need to plan my lessons. I need to do this. I need to do that. So you can't inflict that on people, because I remember the main complaint we used to have was, oh, don't make us brainstorm again.
Yes. Amen. That's exactly what I mean. Just tell me what you want to tell me.
Okay. So a better task might be, okay, I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to do a session with you on assessment for learning, responsive teaching, whatever we want to call it. Okay, now you two go and plan a lesson with good pivot points in for tomorrow. Different kind of activity.
Well, so something you can use, you mean, it can actually be
In
useful,
other
and actually you
words,
could, yeah, okay.
yeah. And at the same time, I maintain my original idea. You come back to me and you're demonstrating to me what you've understood that I was saying about responsive teaching. So if you come back with a lesson that is clearly didactic, talk, and now read the book and do the answer, write the answers. We've seen these teachers many times, haven't we? I would say you didn't understand what I was talking about, and we would be able to then reflect on that in the nicest possible way and say, well, okay, well, why might I be saying that this might be a good idea? So it's about actually giving you the chance to understand something, demonstrate that you understand it, maybe reflect on, and the best thing would be then, okay, now let's plan a series of these lessons. Let's do, atomic structure, since we were on that earlier. Between the department, let's put this all together. Now I'm going to come back in 6 weeks. Let's go try these lessons. Let's observe each other. How did that work? And that would be really productive. But it's quite different to brainstorming about something.
I think we're coming back. I think we've come back in circle in a way. I think what you were saying about the bigger picture earlier and seeing the practicality of what it is you're teaching about. I think the same is true when you're being taught. You need to feel, or trained, you need to feel that what you're going to be taught or trained is going to be something you can practically use, and you can see the bigger picture for it, and that you're going to be able to take whatever you've to the point, as you said, where you're basically doing your own job. You're doing, which is preparing a lesson, but amongst peers and amongst people with experience, and you're able to take it hopefully to the next level and take something back to your classroom.
For example, I mean, I think there's lots of things I would do. I ran lots of sessions with the Royal Society of Chemistry, for example, on subject knowledge for people who were teaching chemistry, maybe, who were a biologist or who were doing A-level for the first time. And it was a lot about practical work, and it was a lot about, they had a very particular program. Sometimes I found difficult to deliver because it wasn't my program. But that's what I was saying earlier. But it was very much about imparting information to those people. These experiments work. You can try them, which is always good about science. You've always got something practical to do. These experiments work. They will demonstrate this. They have this background knowledge. So that is a slightly different, there's pedagogy and there's subject knowledge, isn't there, when you're talking about learning.
Well, it's really good. Now, it's funny that you talked about the Royal Society, because I was in my head, I was thinking, every year the Royal Society of Chemistry has a Christmas lecture, right? They do that, which is about, am I wrong in saying it's about an hour? Yeah, it's about an hour, right? The program, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. Anyways, I mean, there's not a lot. I mean, it is essentially, and I was thinking about TED Talks as well. And these TED Talks and that Christmas lecture, they tend to be quite long. And these people manage to engage, that sounds a bit pejorative. I mean, the lecturers, the people doing the presentation, they manage to engage people for quite a long period of time. And I remember I've watched quite a few of them, and I had the privilege of actually going to the Royal Society and seeing one of these lectures live for myself. And you don't take your eyes off. And at the time, I had a group of pupils of about 15 pupils, I think, and I had no discipline issues. None of them were, well, which school we were working in. We didn't have always the most.
I think we maybe went to the same one, did we?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, with the two of us, I think. Yeah, I think we're bookending them. Yeah, we bookended them. I think you booked that. I should have known that. Anything good in that school was spearheaded by you. So we bookended them, and we had no problem whatsoever. They were just listening, and they were just not chatting at all. And so, what at this point, if you have to stand in front of an audience for, let's say, half an hour, 45 minutes, and they are captive, and they have to listen to you for that period of time, what would you say to somebody that has to do such an exercise?
Oof. Well, be very well prepared. You know, you have to
Yeah.
know your stuff,
Yeah.
know your stuff.
Yeah.
You have to think about how you're going to break it down. You have to, I suppose, in terms of, I'm trying to think of things when I've actually done, I probably do maybe maximum 20 minutes, 25 minutes. It's not really something I would go for an hour lecture. So I've been lucky I've not
Yeah.
had that kind of thing in my job. I would say, what are your key points? Break it down into your 3 or 4 key points and how you're going to illustrate those. I think I probably use quite a lot of, it's not often not intentional. It's not that people are mocking me, but I think I use quite a lot of humor, silly things that just
Yeah.
kind of come up.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just, I don't know, it's in my character, I don't know, and people, it
Sure.
seem to make people laugh, but it's never, I don't know where that comes from really, but I think you do need to be not too deadpan. You need to have
Yeah.
some funny stories, and you have to be careful that that how those come about. I think what works well with the Christmas lectures, for example, I think is that there is some interaction with the audience, so you kind of have some kind of a question or a poll or a volunteer or something like
Yeah.
that. I'm thinking back one time I was sent to talk at the, where was it? Salters Hall, and it was the Salters teacher prize winners, and
Yes.
because I was involved with the Salters A-level chemistry, and maybe it might have been the 21st century science program as well. I can't remember. It was the 21st century science program I was talking about, and it was a captive audience. Not only did I turn up and I'd come straight from school and I was in my school kind of, which was kind of not smart, but not unsmart. They were all in
Smart
evening
casual.
dresses. They were all in evening dresses, and all the other speakers were in evening dresses. Nobody had told me this, so this was the first thing. So I was like the teacher. But I think because what I was saying was quite controversial, and
Okay.
I had some serious points that I wanted to make, but I knew that this audience were not going to be they were not going to be automatically supporting me. So I was
On your
quite
side.
careful and clear in the points that I wanted to make, and
Okay. Yeah.
allowing them plenty of time to come back and ask me some pretty tough
Questions.
questions.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, I quite like that. So preparation, definitely, like being prepared, presenting your ideas logically, having a bit of humor, especially about yourself as well. I think if you make mistakes
Yeah.
or if you stumble on your words, like being ready to be relaxed
Yeah.
about that. And the last point you made about being a little bit unpredictable, I think that is helpful so that people don't, because there's nothing worse but watching a film, for example, and oh yeah, we know what's going to happen there, right? We've been there, done
Yeah.
that, right? And I think it's the same is true for a presentation. There's nothing worse than sitting there and saying, okay, I've heard this before, let's forget it. I think if you can find an angle where you can be unpredictable into what you're
Yeah.
going to say and say things, show that you've actually done some research and perhaps try and think outside the box, to use a silly expressions, but try to think outside of what people usually think, then you can really grab your audience's
And maybe a
attention.
part of that is also in it, the accepting of the invitation is
Ah,
if you're given a title that you're going to talk on. So the clever event organizer in that case knew that what I was, because they knew about our program and the 21st century science work that we've been
yep,
doing, knew that that was going to be a sort of slightly controversial issue for the audience there. So some of them were
yeah,
very traditional. I mean, they were all winning teachers, so I'm sure they were all great teachers. But there was definite, there were some people who were very interested and some people who were, very antagonistic. So there was quite a good range of different types of comments and questions at the end of it. So I think you have to be careful in accepting to talk on an issue. If you're not happy to talk on that issue,
yeah.
then maybe don't accept to do it. And well, if it's part of your job, obviously you have to, but then
Yeah, no, but you make a really good point. So just to close up on this part of the discussion, What would you say is the difference between standing up in front of children speaking up and standing up in front of adults? I'm not sure where to put the barrier there, whether to say it's above 18 or below 18, but I think maybe in a school and in a professional setting or on a political setting, you've done it all, okay? Even now you're teaching people that are in their retirement age. You've taught kids that are who were teenagers and just pre-teenagers, and you've taught people that were in the midst of at the height of their professional career. What would you say is the main difference between teaching an adult and a child?
I think there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, okay, so you would say not much.
Well, yeah, you say, I mean, I don't work with very young children. So I have done I have worked in primary in environments, but on a very specific thing. And even there, not with well, I have worked with, but not much. I don't have much experience working with very young children. I think young teenagers, I mean, talking from, GCSE upwards or whatever, not much difference. PGC students, trainee teachers can be very, very childish,
I agree.
In a way that the GCSE student, the very serious GCSE student, would be more serious than them. I think, again, it's appropriateness of what you're doing. So if you've got a very weak group of children at the age of 12, say, who can't read and write, who don't speak English, maybe even, then you've got a different, and I'm trying to teach in English, obviously, and I can't speak their language. You've got a different group of people than if you've got a group of A-level students who are very serious and wanting to go to Oxbridge. So, it's the material but I think the material has to be appropriate. The respect is the same. I think respect is an important part of any, whether or not I'm trying to convince you of something that I'm never going to convince you of. I still need to be respectful. Otherwise I've lost, or if I'm talking in a political sense, if in an educational sense, respect is always to me, when people say, how hard is it to work with teenagers? I say, if you respect, they respect back. I think that works for adults as well. I think respect is really, really important, and valuing other people's view.
Yeah, I'll bounce on that, as because it's difficult. You can't. I'm not going to talk about love in a sense, but I'll talk about love in a sense that you must love your neighbor, and so I will say that the kids that I had in my lessons, however I felt about their personality, I always felt a sense of duty to make sure that they would be engaged in the lesson and that they would take something away from it. And I think that doesn't change if you're talking to adults. And it would be a mistake to think that because you're talking to adults, you're less responsible for their attention span. These people have been asked to sit next to you, to sit in front of you, or maybe they have paid to listen to you. Whatever the case, they are now in front of you. You're responsible for them. You're responsible for them to take something away from what you're going to say, not waste their time. And I think that's really important. And that doesn't change whether they're children or adults. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. I mean, there's nothing worse. It's like, you're talking about the inset days that you felt were a waste of time. It's totally important that, there's something taken away from it. And, that, especially if you've got a captive audience, which you have with children, you have to, I mean, even if you pay for a talk, you can walk out as an adult,
Yeah. And I think it's often an argument you have with teachers, like, you'll be chatting around a beer and you'll say, look, what's harder, having it, standing in front of adults or standing in front of children and speaking? And I think my thought is that a lot of people say it's actually harder to do it in front of teenagers, for example. And I think the reason is what you've just said, is that because they're captive, and you really feel like you have to, and they're not there because they want to be there for many of them. And so that's that can be very intimidating. You can't say to them, you listen to me or I'll dock your paychecks. They're there because they have to be there. Yeah.
I was talking to my partner yesterday, I was thinking about talking to you today, and he was a
Yeah.
physics teacher. So he said
Yes.
the best thing a student ever said to him was that when, even though he'd been teaching a long time, was that when he walked into the lesson, his eyes were shining with enthusiasm and his lessons were electric. I
Uh,
mean, that's it. That's, if you could capture that, it's about confidence, enthusiasm,
yeah.
and appropriateness, and it's wonderful.
Okay, so we have, I think there's two more bits and bobs that I want to really mention before I let you
Okay.
go. Like, first of
Okay.
all, COVID. Sorry, we got to speak about that. It's been a huge part of our lives for the last few years. And you told me something that I found very interesting. COVID arrived towards the end of your career as a teacher, a training teacher, a teacher training. Was that right? A trainer of
Teacher
teachers.
trainer,
Let's put it that way. Yeah, that's it.
teacher
Teacher trainer.
educator teacher
That's it.
educator is the best word.
Teacher educator. And you told me, would you mind telling me how much you struggle with that part of thing and having to go on to
Well,
do
yeah.
things in a virtual way?
I remember the last day at work was the 16th of March. So we were just, we had a group of student teachers who were supposedly in the middle of obviously their last placement. It was all cancelled. So we had to try to help teachers to learn to do the final part of their teaching without having any children to teach, and do it all on
Yeah,
computers. And we were trying to develop, um, you know, strategies for them
yeah,
using Teams, whatever it was at the time, which was not as developed as it is now. And I found it really alienated me because they didn't have good enough equipment. I couldn't get any responses. Everything I'm talking about being responsive, I couldn't, half the time the cameras wouldn't work, or they weren't switching them off intentionally. They weren't that rude, I don't think. But I found
yeah,
it, I couldn't relate through the screen in the way that I would normally do. And we were trying to, obviously running to catch our own tails because we didn't really know what to do. And I know that other places did a better job than we did. It was not good the way we did it, and the students really had a bit of a rum deal, I think, even though COVID. But I found the whole thing about trying to do online teaching impossible. I really found it difficult. I just
what
found
would you
it.
say, what support do you think you would have required to feel like this was doable, that you could overcome this barrier?
um Well, I suppose I was also at that stage and I was coming up to retirement anyway. So
Okay.
whether I was looking for support or not, I mean, what support would I have needed? The enthusiasm to want to do it. I don't know how
Yeah,
you would have got
your
that.
own
So, but
enthusiasm.
for me, it was about, I don't really want to have to learn all of this now.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I should leave it to somebody who's going to be more enthusiastic to do it. So I'm not
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. I suppose I needed the technological support,
yeah.
in terms of, and also then, the time and space, which we didn't have because it all just happened, didn't it? To
Mm.
actually think, well, what can we do? So we tried to regurgitate the best things we could to put them online and things like that. And it wasn't good. Even having a discussion on the group, how to run discussions, how to use these
Yeah.
breakout rooms. I'm not really sure, Tim, to be honest. I just
Okay.
ran away from it because I was at that age I could. That's a bit sad, isn't it? But sorry.
No, it's not. I think it's fair enough. I think a lot of people are like that, whether they're at their retirement age or not. And I think a lot of I think unfortunately, I'm going to say unfortunately because I'm a little bit like you. I would of course prefer to speak to someone face to face with rather than having to speak to them through some sort of video conference tool. But I think unfortunately the way life is going now, it's gonna it's going to be essential. It's going to be an essential tool. It is already an essential tool for a
Oh,
lot of people for being
definitely,
able to work from
definitely.
home. And I think a lot of companies are not making it easy. They are not moving towards helping people technologically to be able to achieve that. They're afraid that people are just going to be having having a laugh at home and just not do any work. I think there's a distrust of the employee of taking responsibility for the tasks that they have to do. They can't trust them to do what they're going to do from home and everything.
I'm
And I do
sure,
think there are people.
yeah, I'm sure there must be some really interesting research that's been done over
Yeah,
this period of time about both in educational environments and work-based environments.
yeah,
I'm sure there's, but I don't know of it, but I'm sure some people will, how people have moved this forward, how people have, because this technology, this we're using, is this Zoom we're using? Yeah. This
yes.
technology has
Please
transformed
sponsor,
in
by the
the
way. Please
time.
sponsor. Okay, sorry.
Hey?
I said please sponsor.
Oh yeah, it's transformed in the way that the capacity that it's done, and I
Yeah,
use it
definitely.
a lot, and I don't mind this one-to-one. What I found more difficult was having 19 students
I know.
in my tutor group,
Yep.
half of whom didn't have equipment or internet access that was good enough. So
Hmm.
it was about that balance. It's a little bit like our earlier conversation, isn't it? And if I had the will and the wherewithal to do it, how much can I present? How much do I need to give them a task, send them
Yeah,
away in groups to do it,
yeah,
come back and do it? You know,
yeah.
what's going to be the most productive learning for them? And
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
that.
it's still a learning curve. Yeah, I've been
Yeah.
a teacher. I had an experience of being a teacher, an online teacher for a school for about 5 years, and to this day, I still struggle with that side of things. I would say that I am now experienced. I would say that I'm now a lot better than I was when I first started, but it doesn't, for sure, it doesn't replace it
Yeah.
doesn't replace being able to be face to face in a
I tell you,
classroom.
here's an interesting story. For my retirement then,
Yeah,
I did my retirement speech to my students. There was two of us retiring, and I'd been working in education for, oh goodness me, 38 years.
yeah,
So I thought, well, I'm going to do something. I'm not just
yes,
going. So I put together a whole heap of photographs and made a little sort of rolling display. And then I did a talk about my career, and my colleague did the same thing. And we both, the students, as far as I know, were there. But it's the weirdest feeling. It's like I'm talking to nobody. I
yeah,
didn't have that sense of the people being there.
yeah.
There's no, when I make my silly joke, nothing comes back.
I know, I know.
And
I know. It's
that's
like talking. I always refer to it as the void of the internet. You feel like you're speaking to a void, like a black hole, and your emotions are not received, and
yeah.
it's very tough to deal with. Yeah, yeah,
And then the little
yeah.
chat
Okay.
down the side helped a lot. So the chat thing was great.
Yes.
And actually the
Yeah.
course that I've just done this year, they ran a what do they call it? Like live and online
Yes.
together. And they actually did a really good job. By the end of the year, they were doing a good job. Hybrid, I suppose you'd
Good.
call it. And
Yeah.
that's, the chat thing is great, actually. The
Yeah.
chat thing is a powerful, powerful tool that we didn't
Yeah. And I
really
would say,
know.
if you can, like, keep the camera on. Like, if you're out there and you've been asked to attend a meeting, I think it's professional. I can understand why children wouldn't do it sometimes, but I think it's professional as an adult to dress up,
Definitely.
and you have a responsibility to dress up, to act as if you were going into your workplace, as you would have had to anyway. So why don't you do it?
Yeah.
You're cutting your journey by, I don't know how, especially in London, you're cutting your travel journey by
Wow.
like 2
Yeah.
hours, or
Yeah.
yeah, 2 hours both ways. So why don't you use that time, sort your lighting out, have a nice background, and just show yourself. And I think
Yeah.
if there's a message that we can pass on from this, I think it would be that it would make it so much easier for people who have to deliver lectures online.
Definitely. And also because
Okay,
Zoom now can have so many faces up there, you can actually see
exactly.
lots of faces,
Yeah,
can't you?
you can have pages and pages and pages of them. And I've been fortunate because I've often had one child that's put their camera on. And then when I had a lesson, when I had one child that would put the camera on, back in the days when I was teaching in an online school, I would just concentrate. I would just speak to that child. I would make a conscious effort to not to forget everybody else, and check everybody else's efforts, and look at all the online chats, and look at all the cloud things that were being uploaded, and thinking about it, I'm getting dizzy. It was just such a tough thing to make it interactive. But in any case, but I would, stare at that one child and I would speak to them individually, because it makes such a difference to speak to somebody in their eyes, even if it's through a screen. So message out there, people, please put your cameras on. Okay, so to make this podcast a little bit 21st century, I've asked ChatGPT if it could come up with a question for you. And actually, I didn't have to have a long conversation with it before it came up with a decent one. So I think we've been over it, but I'm still going to ask it. So I said, if you could give a fun and memorable science-themed TED Talk, what would the title and topic be? And how would you engage and inspire your audience?
Yeah. Now I've thought about this, Tim, and I thought if I could come up with a really inspiring title and a topic, I'd probably have done it, wouldn't I?
Come on, don't let me down.
I am going to let you down. I suppose I might take something that was in the news. Okay, one of my favorite things would be something that's in the news. And at the moment, I would think something about China's development of very high tech devices. That they were talking yesterday on the news about their electric cars and their development of very high tech batteries. And as a chemist, and having traveled to the far northwest of China, my talk might be something about what is the role of metals in, our industries at the moment. And it's not, the title is not exciting, but it's about what is the role of the metal industry in China on world peace, or something like that. It's really, really, really like fundamental issues that are in the news all the time that people don't really always recognize. And that would always be my ways, to find something that's very topical and very controversial, probably, as well.
I love it. I knew you were not going to disappoint. And you see, this is what I mean. You've just summarized everything we talked about. You would do a presentation about something that's a little bit controversial, would grab everybody else's attention. It's unexpected. You would do it about something that's a little bit personal to you. You said it yourself. You're a science teacher, but you've also traveled to that region of the world. And that would make it, for, I'm sure, an amazing, enthusiastic, and an enthusiastic presentation. If you ever do it, please invite me. I would love to hear it.
It's not going to happen.
This segues nicely into the last two questions I like to ask my guests. So one is a reflective question, okay, which is, what would you say you need to improve, and how would you go on about it as a public speaker? So if you were to give a lecture tomorrow, what would you particularly pay attention to, because it's a bit of a weak point of yours?
Being succinct enough. Being succinct. Don't go off on one. And that is, again, comes down to your planning, comes down to your, I've got 20 minutes, I've got 3 main points I'm going to make. Don't go off on one. Don't go off on a side track.
But I don't blame you. You're an interesting person. You have loads of interesting things to say. So I get why you keep going off on
yeah,
one.
But if you want to keep people's attention, you have to be succinct. I think I'm also not very good. I most times when I turn up, people say to me, "Do you want a PowerPoint?" I'm like, "No." No. I don't make good use of the technological tools that there are. So, for example, I often, if I do have to do something, if people want something behind it, will normally just be images or something. I talk much better I don't like words on screens. So
no.
I don't know whether that's important, but, if people, so I suppose these days most people would record something if they want it.
Yeah. The guest that we've had yesterday as well was making that point as well. It's like, don't put words on the board that people can read themselves, and you don't need to say yourself. If you want to put something on the board, let them read it and then talk about it if you need to. But saying what's on the board and having people read it is just counterproductive, I find. But yeah. So succinct, I love that. So the last question: if anyone was to have the pleasure of watching you at work during a presentation, what would you tell them to imitate? Go on, don't be shy. Now's not the time.
Nothing.
Come
yourself.
on, just one thing. Being yourself.
be yourself. Be yourself.
Be natural.
Imitate your own character. Be your character. If you want to, I would say I hope to be myself. I hope to be true to myself. So I would say if you could do that for yourself, you're not going to look the same as me.
Yeah.
And that would be something definitely for teachers, for presenters. Do it if you want to use PowerPoint and obviously do it in your own way. But yeah, don't have too many words because that never works. But if you want to use PowerPoint, use it. Just use it properly.
Yeah.
And don't use that swirly thing because that makes me feel sick. Whatever that was called. It seems to die.
What do you mean the thing that they used to pick a name or something like this? When the slides changed quickly.
There was a new one that came in that was like PowerPoint and it had like a web thing and you clicked on one and then it whirled into another one and it went, I don't remember.
The transition, the slide transitions.
Yeah. But it's a different tool.
Okay,
we digress.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So be yourself. That's what I say. Imitate.
I get that. Yeah, being natural, I think, is really important when you're giving a presentation. I think being natural is super important.
Yeah.
And
I think it's don't try to imitate, which is why I'm difficulty answering the question.
Yeah, very good. So now it's great now. Now you're basically taking over my podcast and telling me how to ask the questions. All right, fine. I will change the question because of you. Thank you very much, Sheila. Well, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. It was really nice. I had a lot of fun, and I'm sure some people, if anybody gets to listen to this at some point, will also really appreciate your experience and all the things you've had to chat about. Right, you can do a bit of a plug now. You just told me before the podcast that you're actually teaching piano. Do you mind me telling people this? Yeah. So if you want Sheila to give you piano lessons, then please don't hesitate to contact us in the comments.
A possibility. I'm keeping a small number. Funnily enough, they're all my ex-colleagues at the moment. There's a lot of adults out. I tell you what, my plug would be, if there's something that you want to do that you haven't managed to do when you get to the point of having the time to do different things, whether, for whatever reason, then, go with it. You don't have to, I retrained as a piano teacher last year.
Exactly. I'm not sure you understand the concept of plugs. This is, you're being too nice about this.
I'm not looking for lots of students.
Okay, the message has been passed on. Thank you very much, Sheila, for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, Tim. It's lovely to chat to you. It's lovely to chat. Lovely to see you.
I've had an awesome time. So thank you, everyone, for listening to this podcast. If you have enjoyed it at least half as much as I have, please don't forget to like and to subscribe. Feel free to reach out to us on our various social media platform. All of the information is in the description. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon.